I want to start tonight with a question I ask almost everybody who comes to me with a problem in their life, whether it's a business problem or a marriage problem or a problem with their own family. I ask them this: after you spend time with that person, do you feel built up, or do you feel like you need a day to put yourself back together? Most people have never once asked themselves that question in those exact words, and the moment they do, something shifts in their face, because they already know the answer. They've known it for years. They just never had a sentence for it. Tonight I want to give you that sentence. Stop accepting treatment you have to recover from. Not treatment you disagree with. Not treatment that challenges you. Treatment that costs you something and leaves you needing time to get back to yourself. That is not a normal cost of being in relationship with people. That is a debt you have been quietly paying, on a schedule you never agreed to, for probably longer than you'd like to admit. Now here's where I need you to pay close attention, because this is the part almost everyone gets wrong the first time they hear this idea. They hear stop accepting treatment you have to recover from, and their mind immediately goes to the dramatic cases, the abusive relationship, the screaming boss, the obvious villain. And sure, this applies there. But if that's the only place your mind goes, you're going to miss 90% of where this is actually costing you, because most bad treatment isn't dramatic at all. It's polite. It's even, on the surface, well-meaning. It's the relative who has a way of turning every conversation into a referendum on your choices. It's the friend who only calls when they need something and disappears the moment you need anything back. It's the colleague who takes credit in the meeting and apologizes so sincerely afterward that you end up comforting them. None of that looks like mistreatment from the outside. All of it costs you a recovery period on the inside. And the quiet, respectable ones are the most dangerous, precisely because they never give you a single moment dramatic enough to justify walking away. Let's put some actual numbers on this, because I've found that people can talk themselves out of a feeling, but they have a much harder time talking themselves out of arithmetic. Think about the handful of people in your life right now who leave you needing recovery time more often than not. For most people I've worked with over the years, that number lands somewhere between 2 and 4 people, not strangers, not acquaintances, people who are woven into your regular life. Now think honestly about how often you interact with each of them in a way that costs you something. Once a week is common. Some of you are shaking your head because for you it's closer to every single day. Let's be conservative and say once a week, across 3 people. That's 3 recovery episodes a week, roughly 150 a year, and if each one costs you even half a day of feeling like less of yourself before you're fully back, distracted, short-tempered, low on the kind of energy you need for the things that actually matter, you are losing 75 days a year. 75 days. Out of 365, you are spending roughly 1 out of every 5 days paying down a debt to relationships that, if you're honest with yourself, are not paying you back anything close to what they're costing. Do that for 10 years and you have lost the better part of 2 full years of your one life to recovery from treatment you never had to accept in the first place. I want to tell you about a man I'll call Walter Pruitt, though again, I've changed the details because the lesson is what matters. Walter ran a small landscaping company, good with his hands, better with numbers than anybody gave him credit for, and for almost 15 years he had a business partner I'll call Denny. They'd started the company together right out of high school, and Denny was, by Walter's own description, the idea man, full of energy, full of big plans, always the one talking to potential clients at the Chamber of Commerce mixers. What nobody outside the business saw was that every single major decision the two of them made together turned into a 2-hour negotiation where Denny would present himself as reasonable and present Walter as difficult, right up until Walter caved, which he almost always did, because Walter hated conflict more than he loved being right. Walter told me it got to the point where he started rehearsing conversations with Denny in his truck before he even walked into the shop, trying to plan out every objection in advance, and he still walked away most days feeling like he'd lost an argument he never wanted to have in the first place. I met Walter at a small business roundtable I was invited to speak at, and during the lunch break he told me about Denny, mostly, I think, because he needed to say it out loud to somebody who wasn't already tangled up in the business with him. And I asked him the same question I opened with tonight. I said, Walter, after you spend an afternoon working through a decision with Denny, do you feel like the two of you built something together, or do you feel like you need the rest of the day to recover? Walter didn't answer right away. He just kind of laughed, the way people laugh when something true lands on them unexpectedly, and he said, Jim, I haven't felt built up by a conversation with Denny in probably 8 years. I just didn't have a name for what I was feeling instead. I told Walter what I'm telling you tonight, and I gave him one instruction, the same one I've given 100 people in his position. I said, for the next month, after every real conversation with Denny about the business, I want you to write down one honest sentence about how you felt afterward. Not what was said. Not who was right. Just how you felt, in your own words, no editing. Walter did it, mostly out of curiosity. He told me later, more than any real belief it would change anything. By the end of that month, The pattern staring back at him from his own notebook was almost identical every single time. Drained, small, talked over, second-guessing myself. 15 years of partnership, and the honest record of a single month said, in Walter's own handwriting, that nearly every meaningful conversation with his own business partner left him feeling smaller than it found him. Walter didn't dissolve the partnership overnight, and I want to be straight with you about that, because these things rarely move as fast as we'd like. It took him the better part of a year to work through what unwinding 15 years of shared ownership actually looked like, with lawyers involved and a business valuation and all the practical machinery that comes with something that big. But the notebook changed the question he was asking himself. He stopped asking, "Is this worth blowing up over?" which is a question designed to keep you frozen forever, and started asking, "How many more years am I willing to feel this way in a business I helped build?" That's a completely different question, and it has a completely different kind of power, because it isn't asking you to justify a dramatic exit. It's just asking you to be honest about a cost you've been paying quietly for a decade and a half. Walter bought out his half of the disagreement 2 years after that lunch conversation, started a smaller outfit on his own with 2 guys he'd trained personally, and told me the strangest adjustment wasn't the workload, which was actually heavier running his own shop. It was that he stopped rehearsing conversations in his truck. He said, "Jim, I didn't realize how much of my mental energy for 15 years had gone into preparing for arguments with my own partner until I suddenly had nothing left to prepare for." I want you to notice something in Walter's story, because it's the same thing I want you to notice in your own life. Denny was never, in Walter's telling, a villain in the way we usually picture one. He wasn't cruel. He probably would have been genuinely shocked to hear Walter describe those 15 years the way Walter eventually described them to me. Most people delivering treatment you have to recover from are not mustache-twirling villains. They are, far more often, people who have simply never had to examine the cost of how they operate, because the person absorbing that cost, you, never handed them the bill. You just quietly paid it, year after year, and called it the price of doing business, or the price of family, or the price of friendship. It was never actually the price of any of those things. It was just the price you'd gotten used to paying because nobody ever showed you the total. Let me give you one more distinction, because I know some of you sitting here tonight are already trying to figure out how this applies to a relationship where the answer isn't so clean. A parent, say, or a spouse, or a child you'd walk through fire for even on their worst day. This isn't a rule that says walk away from every difficult person in your life. Family and marriage and deep friendship come with obligations that a business partnership doesn't, and I'm not standing up here tonight telling you to abandon those obligations. What I am telling you is that even inside those relationships, there's a difference between the hard seasons that come with loving somebody through something, and a permanent pattern that never lets up, never improves, and never even gets acknowledged. A parent going through a health crisis who's short-tempered for 6 difficult months is a season. A parent who has been critical of every decision you've made for 20 years, health crisis or not, is a pattern. You don't abandon someone for a season, but you are allowed to stop absorbing a pattern without apology, even inside the relationships you'd never walk away from entirely. Sometimes stopping the pattern looks like a shorter visit. Sometimes it looks like changing the subject the 5th time it comes up instead of defending yourself the 5th time. You can love somebody completely and still refuse to keep paying a debt they've never once acknowledged charging you. So let's talk about what to do with this, because I don't believe in leaving a room with a feeling and no instructions. First, identify your 2 or 3 people, the way Walter had his one. You already know who they are. Don't overthink this step. The names that come to mind in the first 5 seconds are almost always the right ones. It's the names you have to talk yourself into that usually aren't. Second, start the notebook, exactly the way Walter did. 1 honest sentence, after every real interaction, for 30 days. Not what they said. How you felt. Let your own handwriting build a case, because your feelings alone haven't moved you yet or you'd have moved already, and evidence written in your own hand is much harder to argue yourself out of than a feeling you had on a random Tuesday. Third, once the pattern is undeniable, separate the question of blame from the question of exposure. You do not need Denny to admit he was difficult before Walter is allowed to build a different business. You do not need the relative to admit they're critical before you're allowed to shorten the phone calls. You do not need the friend to admit they only call when they need something before you're allowed to stop being available every single time. Waiting for the other person's confession before you act is one of the great traps in this whole conversation, because that confession, in most cases, is never coming, and you will wait for it for the rest of your life if you let yourself. Fourth, understand that reducing your exposure to treatment you recover from does not require a dramatic confrontation, and for most of the relationships in your life, it shouldn't be one. Walter didn't stage a blow-up with Denny. He built a plan quietly, over months, the same way Walter built everything else in his life, and when the moment came to act, it was almost businesslike. You are allowed to protect your own peace without narrating every step of it to the person costing you that peace. A shorter phone call. A boundary stated once and then simply held, without an apology attached to it, the next 10 times it's tested. A meeting you no longer attend in person. These are not small moves. Over a year, they add up to the 75 days you were losing, given back to you one interaction at a time. There's a fifth step too, one people almost always underestimate, and it's this: expect the withdrawal symptoms. I use that phrase deliberately, because that's exactly what it feels like the first few weeks after you stop absorbing a pattern you've been absorbing for years. You will feel guilty for the shorter phone call, even though nothing about it was unkind. You will feel like the difficult one for the first time in a relationship, even though you're the one who's been paying the price the whole time. That discomfort is not proof you're doing something wrong. It's proof you're doing something your nervous system isn't used to yet, because it had 15 years of practice absorbing the old pattern and 0 practice holding a new one. Walter told me the first month after he started drawing real boundaries with Denny was, in his words, some of the most uncomfortable weeks of his adult life, worse in some ways than the years before it, because at least the old pattern was familiar. Discomfort from change and damage from mistreatment can feel identical in the first few weeks. Don't confuse the two. Give the new pattern time to become the new normal before you decide whether it was the right call, because it almost always is. Here's the part one want you to sit with longest tonight. Every single day you spend in recovery is a day that cannot be spent building anything else. Not your health. Not your own business. Not the relationships in your life that actually do build you up, the ones you've probably been neglecting precisely because you were too depleted from the ones that don't. Walter told me that within a year of starting his own shop, his relationship with his own son, who was 17 at the time, changed more than it had in the previous 5 years combined, and when I asked him why, he said simply, I had energy left over for him for the first time in a long time. That's the real cost of treatment you have to recover from. It's never just the bad day itself. It's everything good that never got built because you were too busy recovering to build it. So here is what I want you to do, starting tonight, before you go to sleep. Write down the 2 or 3 names. Tomorrow, start the notebook, one honest sentence, no editing, after every real interaction with each of them, for the next 30 days. Do not act on anything yet. Just gather the evidence, the same way Walter did, the same way I've asked hundreds of people to do before they made any decision at all. Let your own handwriting tell you the truth your feelings have been trying to tell you for years, and at the end of those 30 days, ask yourself Walter's real question, not the frozen one. Not, is this worth blowing up over? Ask instead, how many more years am I willing to pay this? Most of you are not going to do this. I've given this talk enough times to know exactly how it goes. Most people will feel something tonight, nod along, maybe even tell somebody in the car on the way home, and by next week they'll be back in the exact same pattern, still rehearsing conversations in their own version of Walter's truck, still calling it the price of loyalty. That is their right, and I'm not here to shame anyone for it. But some of you are going to start that notebook tomorrow morning. Some of you are going to read your own handwriting back in 30 days and finally stop waiting for a confession that was never coming. And a few years from now, you and I are going to cross paths again, and you're going to tell me about the energy you got back, for your health, for your own work, for the people in your life who were building you up the whole time while you were too depleted to notice. That's the whole message tonight, so don't let it slide past you the way you've let so many true things slide past you before. Stop accepting treatment you have to recover from. Learn to spot it even when it's polite, even when it's well-meaning, even when the person delivering it would be genuinely shocked to hear you describe it that way. Measure it instead of feeling it. And once you've measured it, treat your own peace as something worth protecting on purpose, not something you apologize for wanting. If tonight's message landed for you, tell me in the comments which name came to mind in the first 5 seconds. I read every single one of them, and I promise you weren't the only one who had a name ready before I even finished the sentence. And if you want more of this kind of straight talk, the kind that names what nobody else in your life will say out loud, subscribe to Legacy Mindset, because this is the work we do here every single week. Now go get that notebook.